What's going on, everyone? It's Horror Master, and I'm back with another video. Yeah, a bit quicker than last time. I know, like I mentioned before, my previous video, I'm trying to kind of make more videos in 2023, so you might see more of a constant of videos from my side, maybe 1 to 2 videos a week, depending how my schedule works. So, hopefully this is a great step for 2023. But by the title of this video, I am finally bringing you guys after a long time of listening, debating, ranking, kind of pushing this video back and back after a long time. I'm finally bringing you guys my Death's rank 'em all discography. So we're gonna be ranking all of Death's albums. To be frankly, Death is one of those few bands in the world that every single album is a masterpiece. You cannot go wrong with any single Death album. Even the one that I'm gonna have at the very bottom of my list is still a phenomenal fucking album. Now, for those who don't know who Death is, one, what are you doing here? And two, you must have been on the rock for the past maybe 30 something years. Death is a American band that some people say they were the originators of death metal. Of course, there's the argument that Possess with Seven Churches created the genre, but I do see the argument. But Death to me was the band that kind of took what bands like Possess and Slayer did, and with of course with Chuck Schuldiner, the mastermind behind Death, got everything from those bands and creating something more new and unique that, like I mentioned before, without the band Death, there wouldn't be any death metal, there wouldn't be any progressive death metal, there wouldn't be any death metal bands. I mean, there's a reason why Chuck Schuldiner is the godfather of death metal. I mean, it's in the fucking name. But regardless of that, let's get into the ranking. So in total, we have 7 albums that I'm going to be discussing here. We're going to be talking from the bottom to the up. And like I mentioned before, this is my personal list. Maybe my number one might be your bottom of the 7, or no, depends. Like I said, this is my perspective. So let me down your comments. What is your favorite Death album? And like I said, just let the discussion be respectful. I want to hear you guys' opinion about it. So without all that, let's get into the ranking. So at number 7, at the bottom of the barrel, and like I said, even though this album's the bottom of the barrel, it's still a phenomenal album. Like I mentioned before, Death, you can go so many ways. That's the thing, the beauty about Death. Death can go from a really progressive death metal band to traditional death metal, old school death metal, to even almost, I mean, look, a band like Vector, you can kind of see the inspirations from a band like Vector and so on and so forth. But for number 7 at the bottom of the barrel, we of course we have Spiritual Healing. This is the third album in the discography, and the thing about Spiritual Healing that I find interesting is that from the album covers, this is probably one of the weirdest album covers in the discography. Not probably, I don't want to say it's the worst, because every single Death album is unique in its own way, but in terms of album covers, kind of the weakest one. But still, the songs of this album are fucking good. I mean, Low Life, probably my favorite song with the album. Alternating the Future, the title track, Spiritual Healing, Killing Spree, Living Monstrosity. I mean, it's like I mentioned before, Dead has no bad albums in the discography, and I think that this is the album that personally is the most weakest one, even though this is probably the beginning of when Dead began to be more progressive along the years. But to me, Spiritual Healing, my personal opinion, is probably the weakest album. Even though it's the weakest album, it still packs a punch like you have nothing heard before. So if you're not listening to Spiritual Healing, give it a listen, you will love it. At number 6, we have Individual Thought Patterns. Now, Individual Thought Patterns is a very, very unique album, because this album, if you listen to the lyrics, if you read the lyrics, this was where Chuck was at his most angriest in his life, because at this point, the record label was, kicking him in the ass. He was canceling tours, so on and so forth. So all that anger, all that frustration that Chuck had, he put it into the album and created a monster of an album. I mean, personally, The Philosopher, the final song of the album, is one of my maybe top 10 favorite death songs in general, or in terms of death metal, probably maybe my top 20 songs of all time. Like I said, depending on your perspective. But Immature Thought Patterns, like I said, it's probably the most angriest album Chuck has ever done, even angrier than something like Scream Bloody Gore or Leprosy. But you know, I mean, to have also Andy LaRock in this album, Steve DiGiorgio, Gene Hoglan, which that's like one of the best matches made in heaven in terms of supergroup, because technically, you want to say technically Death is kind of a supergroup, because revolving members, the only constant was probably is the only Chuck, and maybe something like Steve Giorgio, and maybe Tom Brady and all that. But individual thought patterns, again more progressive, a lot angry, like the most angriest album that Chuck has ever done in his entire life, and packs a fucking punch. Like I said, The Philosopher, Jealousy, Trapped in Corner, Nothing is Everything, Meant to Be Blind. My God, I mean, like I said, it's fucking killer. At number 5, we have Human, the fourth album of the discography, and I believe Human was the album that, to me personally, was when Death began to be more progressive, kind of leaving more of the old school kind of death metal kind of sound to it. It began incorporating more progressive metal elements into his writings. I mean, the solos at this album were beginning to be more creative, more longer, more epicness. That's a perfect way I can say it. More adventurous. Chuck's writing was beginning to be a bit more mature. Personally, I mean, when you have Cosmic Sea, probably like my top two, maybe in the top two greatest instrumental metal songs of all time, next to Battery, next to Orion by Metallica, Master of Puppets. But with Human, points on the album cover, one of the most creative album covers that Death has ever done. But you go beyond that, Secret Face, Lack of Comprehension. I mean, that was a song that a lot of people got into Death when they. I mean, it was the first music video on MTV, and of course, when you see Beavis and Butthead, when Beavis and Butthead are kind of joking on the music video, a lot of fans of the late 80s, early 90s were watching Beavis and Butthead, or were even watching MTV into midnight, and they will turn on the TV and you see the music video from Like a Comprehension. That kind of was a gateway for a lot of younger fans during that time who didn't know all about the underground. They saw this music video on MTV, when back then, when MTV used to actually give a crap about music and give a brighter audience and more fans into Death. And for that, it gave the band a bit more legs to go on and so forth. But check the fucking album, even the bonus track of God of Thunder, because we know that Chuck is Chuck is kind of a fan, sort of fan of Kiss. I mean, as you can see right there, I have almost all the Kiss figurines, Funko Pops. But regardless, Human, a phenomenal, fantastic album. At number 4, we have The Sound of Perseverance. This will be the final album in Death's discography, and unfortunately will be the last album that, of course, will be got from the Death name, because we know during this time, Chuck, after The Sound of Perseverance, he will later create on to another band, which I'm trying to remember the name of it, and of course, some timely Death in 2001, and we kind of still crave for more Death. But for this to be the last album in Death's discography, what a way to go. I mean, from the album cover, which it makes the imagination going, is this like the gateway to hell, or something coming out of hell, or what the hell it is going on in this album cover. But I gotta say, the original album cover, didn't like it. The re-editing of this album cover, which is this one, I kind of like it better. I think it even has the original album cover in the booklet. If I can find it, let me check right here. Give me just a second. Actually, no, it doesn't have the original album cover, which the original album cover, kind of the same thing as this one, but I believe this one's a bit better, personally, in my personal opinion. But when it comes to Death and Sound of Perseverance, for the longest time, this was probably my favorite Death album in general, because it was probably the most progress album they ever did. It is the most adventurous album they've ever done. Chuck's writing was at the top of his end game. I mean, when you have a song like Spirit Crusher, Story to Tell, Voice of the Soul, probably one of my favorite instrumentals in Death's discography. A bit of acoustic, which you never got from, Chuck, which is kind of weird having acoustic melody in a death metal album. Kind of fans are like, what the fuck is this? But still fucking amazing. Scavenger of the Human Spirit, Bite the Pain, the cover of Judas Priest's Painkiller, probably one of the best covers of all time, next to something like maybe Quiet Riot's Come and Feel the Noise, or Pantera's Planet Caravan. It's a shame that we never got enough more deaths, because I do believe if Chuck would have still been alive, give it a couple of years, he would have created another more death albums, more death metal oriented. We're still being a whole that kind of in the middle of a prog death metal oriented style, which is a shame that we never got it, because I do believe Chuck, left us so soon. I mean, he was young. Like, I don't think he was close to his 50s. I think it was maybe in his mid 40s, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a shame that Chuck unfortunately passed away so young, and I wish we could have got more music from Chuck and Death in general. And what a way to go, in my personal opinion. What a way to go. At number 3 is the only album I don't have on the discography, and I know eventually I'm gonna have to get it, and that is Symbolic. Now, Symbolic, again, for the longest time, was my favorite album in Death's discography, because first of all, the album cover, I gotta say, probably one of my favorite top 3 favorite death metal album covers of all time. And in terms of Death, one of the most iconic ones, next to the ones I'm gonna talk about in a bit. But songs from Symbolic are some of the more creative, some of the most adventurous songs you're gonna hear. Of course, the title track, Symbolic, Crystal Mountain, A Thousand Eyes, Empty Words. Like I mentioned before, Death is one of those odd bands in the world that every single album is unique from the other. Sometimes it's a bit more progressive, sometimes it's a bit more old school death metal oriented, but at the end of the day, it's still Death, and Death is, like I said, nothing about Death is ever wrong. Everything Death has ever done is pure gold. And like I mentioned before, Symbolic, for the longest time, one of my favorite death albums in general. For the album cover, for the lyrics, everything about this album is pure fucking gold. At number 2, we have Leprosy. First of all, I'm gonna say this. Yes, you do see I'm gonna showing off. I actually got it signed by Rick Ross, and from shit, I'm forgetting his fucking name. I know I'm gonna kick myself in. Yes, and Terry Butler, of course, Terry Butler. I got it signed by Terry Butler and Rick Ross when Left to Die came into my town, and I actually got to meet both Rick Ross and Terry Butler. And there's some pictures of me with the album and taking the pictures with them, which was fucking amazing. I actually got to talk to both of them, have it signed. But I just want to get out of the way. But for a lot of people, like my good buddy Libby, aka Thrashman 99, have regarded this album as the greatest Death album in Death discography. And I choose the argument because without this album, progressive death metal wouldn't be a thing, wouldn't be a fucking thought. Because from this album, a lot of progressive death metal bands like an Opeth, like maybe Age of Sanity, they kind of took the genesis of what this album did, and they made it into their own. I mean, when you have songs like Open Casket, Open Casket, Choke on It, Leprosy, Forgotten Past, Left to Die, Pull the Plug. That song alone makes Leprosy one of the greatest death albums of all time, and for a lot of people, one of the greatest death metal albums of all time. But like I said, everyone is their own opinion. I respectfully have it at number 2 because, like I've heard a lot of people, it is probably their most influential album in their entire discography. There are some points I do agree, but like I said before, to me, it respectfully ranks at my number 2. And of course, at number 1, the only album I have not been able to talk about was the first Death album actually I got into, and one of the first death metal albums in general, next to Cannibal Corpse's Tune the Mutilated, that got me into death metal. And of course, I am talking about the one, the only, Scream Bloody Gore. When you have Chuck at the beginning of Death, just Chuck alone, and Chris Ryfer, of course, went on to do Autopsy and still fucking kicks ass. When you have those two together and create something unique, something magical that it's untouchable. Scream Bloody Gore, like I said, probably the most iconic Death album cover. I mean, my fucking god, I mean, look, it's fucking zombies on a fucking throne and all that with blood and all that. I mean, what more can you want from that? But every single song on the album is fucking gold. From the title track, Infernal Dead, Zombie Ritual, Baptized in Fire, Beyond the Unholy Grave, Evil Dead. That song alone, Evil Dead by itself, probably my favorite death song in general, and probably my top 5 favorite death metal songs of all time. Because me being a big horror fan, I love the original Evil Dead. I love the Evil Dead franchise, and to have a song about Evil Dead kind of kicks fucking ass. But you know, Chuck's who would have thought that this album would have been the beginning of something big for Chuck? I mean, like I said, eventually becoming the godfather of death metal and the standard bearer for what death metal should be. And of course, as years have gone by, a lot of people, a lot of death metal giants like a Cannibal Corpse, like an Obituary, like a Carcass, have stated that without death, it wouldn't be any death metal. And without this album, next year probably Possessed Seven Churches, Raving, Slayer's Rain and Blood, or even even Slayer's Punch in the Chapel, it'd be death metal wouldn't existed. But to me, Scream Brother Gore is my favorite death album of all time, and that's why I have it at my number 1. And that's it for this video, guys. I hope you guys really enjoyed this ranking mode. Like I said, I've been constantly thinking of this ranking mode for the longest time, and I'm so glad I was finally able, you guys, to bring you this ranking mode. And this won't be the only ranking mode I'm gonna do. Like I said, I'm gonna try to bring more ranking modes in the future. I know the next one I'm gonna bring is gonna be Judas Priest, which, if you thought that this discography was hard, Judas Priest discography is even bigger. So it's gonna take me a while to probably bring you guys that video, maybe sometime next week or maybe next month, depending on the mood. But hope you guys really enjoy this ranking mode. Let me know down in the comments what is your favorite death album in the discography. Let me know your rankings. How would you rank your death albums? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe to the Usher Bang. Follow me on my Instagram. Follow me on my Twitter. Thank you guys so much for watching, guys. And until next time, stay metal.